What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another Mr. McGuinty's How-To Guides. I'm your host, P. McG, and today we're here to install another awesome product by COBB Tuning. These sway bars for the 2008, 2014 WRX and WRX STIs and the Forester XT years 2009 forward. Let's get to it. Okay, tools required to complete this installation are as follows: a floor jack or lift, jack stands if you're not using a lift, wheel chocks if you're using a hydraulic jack, 2 flathead screwdrivers, smaller heads do work best, a ratchet, 6-inch to 12-inch extension, 12, 14, and 17mm socket, 12mm open or box end wrench, 2 14mm open end or box end wrenches, and a 5mm Allen head wrench. Alright, to remove the underbody panel, go ahead and remove these 3 bolts using your 12mm socket. Then using your flathead screwdriver, go ahead and pop out the pop connector located in each wheel well. Now go ahead and remove the 2 clips at the rear of the underbody panel and you're good to go. Now we'll need to remove the subframe brace. To do so, we'll need to remove the 8 14mm bolts, highlighted in green, with our ratchet, and then the 2 14mm nut and bolt, highlighted in blue, with our ratchet and open or box end wrench. And now it's time to unbolt the sway bar from the end links. Use your 14mm open or boxed wrench, and your 5mm Allen wrench to stabilize the center as you turn. You may need to spray some WD-40 or equivalent lubricant on these bolts to loosen them up. The bolt threads may also need a light brushing. Be careful not to apply too much pressure to the Allen key. If you strip that hole, you are out of luck, and you'll be buying a new set of end links. Now using a 12mm socket, go ahead and remove the nut and bolt on both sides of the sway bar bushing bracket. When you get down to the last couple, be careful because the sway bar will be ready to drop as everything else has been released. Once this has been completed, the sway bar can be removed from the vehicle. Alright, now using the supplied bushings and grease, go ahead and grease up the inside of the bushing with a medium to thick layer all the way through. You should use between 1/4 to 1/2 of the tube per bushing. Once you've got it all spread out evenly, go ahead and slide it onto the sway bar, being sure that the split is facing the front of the sway bar. Now it's time to install the new sway bar. Go ahead and slide the end link bolt through the frontmost hole, and then loosely thread on the nut. Having these loosely attached makes it a lot easier to install the sway bar bushing brackets that we'll install in just a moment. Alright, now it's time to tighten down the 12mm nut and bolt on the sway bar bushing bracket to 18 foot-pounds of torque. Don't forget the split in the bushing should be facing the front of the car as indicated by the arrow. Once this has been completed, go back to your end links with your 5mm Allen wrench and your 14mm open or box end wrench and tighten them down to 35 foot-pounds of torque. Once everything's been tightened down to spec, your front sway bar is good to go. Now the sway bar is in place, it's time to reinstall the subframe brace by tightening down the 8 14mm bolts, highlighted in green, and the 2 14mm nuts and bolts, highlighted in blue, to 44 foot-pounds of torque. Now go ahead and reinstall the underbody panel, reversing the instructions you used to uninstall it. Now it's time to remove the rear sway bar. Starting with your 5mm Allen wrench and your 14mm open or boxed wrench, go ahead and remove the nut from the end link. Again, I can't stress how important it is not to put too much pressure onto the Allen key. You don't want to strip that, because if you do, you'll be buying new end links. If you live anywhere where they use salt on the roads, you're likely to encounter corrosion on this part, and may be very difficult to remove. If you're not careful, you may end up with a broken end link, and you might have to do something like this to get it off of the original sway bar. Now, highlighted in blue, go ahead and loosen, but do not remove the 14mm nut and bolt that secures the end link to the lower control arm using your 14mm open or box ended wrench and a 14mm socket. This allows us to swing out the end link from the hole in the sway bar. Now, as previously highlighted in green, go ahead and remove the 12mm bolts holding the sway bar bushing bracket in place. Highlighted in red, you may notice that the 14mm nut and bolt for the lower portion of the end link has been removed. This was done as we were upgrading the end links at the same time we were doing the sway bars. Finally, once the bolts from the sway bar bushing brackets have been removed, you can slide the sway bar out of the end links and through the passenger side to remove it. Alright, now using the supplied bushings and grease, go ahead and grease up the inside of the bushing with a medium to thick layer all the way through. Should use between 1/4 to 1/2 of the tube per bushing. Once you've got it all spread out evenly, go ahead and slide it onto the sway bar, being sure that the split faces the back of the sway bar. Now slide the new sway bar in from the passenger side up over the exhaust, making sure that the bump in the sway bar is facing upward. Once you've done that, tighten down the 12mm bolts on each of the sway bar bushing brackets to 29.5 foot-pounds of torque. Once this is completed, connect the end links to the front hole on the sway bar and reconnect them using your 5mm Allen wrench and your 14mm open or box end wrench, and tighten them down to 33.2 foot-pounds of torque. And lastly, with the car on the ground, tighten the 14mm nut and bolt that secures the end link to the lower control arm to 33.2 foot-pounds of torque. This concludes the installation, but I highly suggest you stick around for the post-installation product review. Okay, this product got high marks in the following categories. OEM fitment. We had no issues whatsoever removing the old sway bars and installing the new COBB sway bars, as they matched up perfectly with all of the OEM locations. Reduced body roll. After installing the new sway bars, it was immediately apparent how much better they are compared to the stock sway bars. It was far easier to take corners at speed, as it felt like we were hugging the road. Next is the quality construction. One side-by-side comparison between OEM and COBB's sway bars. You can immediately see the difference in build quality. And finally is the price. When you talk about cost versus effect, the cost you pay for the effect you get is phenomenal. Don't forget to stop by www.cobbtuning.com for other great products by COBB. And finally, don't forget to stop by and check us out on YouTube. Take it easy, everybody, and we'll see you next install.